Thankfully, the war was coming to a conclusion. Russia had already withdrawn from the battle after the Bolshevik Revolution. The Allied forces had aided the anti-Bolsheviks, however, and this led to long-term mistrust between Russia and the Allies. By November of 1918, the Allies, with fresh new American forces, began to turn the tide of battle, and German soldiers began to retreat along the Western Front. The German Navy ordered its fleet to set out to sea, but the sailors refused. In Germany, soldiers and civilians started organizing revolutionary councils. The people of Berlin rebelled against the Kaiser, who abdicated his throne and escaped to the Netherlands. No final, decisive battle was fought. No Allied soldiers entered German territory. Instead, the German war machine ground to a halt. On the 11th hour of the 11th day, in the 11th month of 1918, Germany agreed to a ceasefire that ended the war. Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, America's ace fighter pilot, flew over the trenches when the armistice was declared.
On both sides of no man's land, the trenches erupted. Brown uniformed men poured out of the American trenches, gray-green uniforms out of the German. I watched them throw their helmets in the air, discard their guns, wave their hands. Suddenly, gray uniforms mixed with brown. I could see them hugging each other, dancing, jumping.
The bloodiest war to date was finally over. During its 4 long years, more than 30 nations participated in battle and in death. But even as the war ended, Americans faced still another crisis, a crisis at home that took more lives than the war itself. A flu epidemic gripped the country, and approximately 25% of the population fell ill with high fevers, headaches, and often pneumonia. About 500,000 Americans died. Businesses shut down, telephone service was curtailed, and corpses lay unburied due to a shortage of coffins. The epidemic, like the war, finally subsided, and a weary America looked to President Wilson and the victorious Allies to deliver a lasting peace. Even before the war was over, Wilson had presented his plan for peace to Congress, his 14 points speech.
We entered this war because violations of right had occurred, which touched us to the quick and made the life of our own people impossible.
Wilson's first 5 points dealt with the issues he felt had caused the war. Nations should no longer engage in secret treaties. The freedom of the seas must be restored, and tariffs should be lowered or removed altogether so free trade could flourish. Wilson demanded an end to the arms race and stockpiling of weapons. He declared that the interest and desires of people living in colonies should be considered by the imperialist countries who ruled them. Wilson's next points addressed boundary changes. Advocating the principle of self-determination, Wilson wanted any new national boundaries to be drawn along historically established lines of allegiance and nationality. His last point was the most important to Wilson. He called for the formation of a League of Nations to keep world peace. The members of the League would agree to protect each other from aggression and settle grievances without going to war. Following the ceasefire in December of 1918, Wilson and his wife Edith sailed aboard the SS George Washington for Europe to attend the Versailles Peace Conference. It was the first time in history that an American president left the United States while in office. Wilson was given a hero's welcome. Crowds cheered him. The citizens of Europe saw Wilson as their best hope for a lasting world peace. But the politicians of Europe, particularly British Prime Minister Lloyd George, who had won election on the slogan, "Make Germany Pay," and French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau, who had lived through 2 German invasions of France, resisted most of Wilson's ideas. To them, the first and foremost goal of the peace treaty was to punish Germany so she could never wage war again. The peace conference did not include the defeated Central Powers, Russia, and the smaller Allied countries. The so-called Big Four, America, Great Britain, France, and Italy, hammered out the peace treaty among themselves. Time and again, Wilson was forced to concede on elements of his 14 points in return for the establishment of the League of Nations. Finally, on June 28, 1919, the Big Four, along with the leaders of the defeated nations, met at the Palace of Versailles to sign the treaty. The Treaty of Versailles created 9 new nations, including Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia, while the borders of other countries were redrawn. 4 sections of the Ottoman Empire were made temporary colonies under the rule of France and Great Britain until they were ready for independence. President Wilson did manage to prevent some of the more extreme punishments, but the treaty demilitarized Germany, banning her air force and navy and limiting her army to only 100,000 men. Germany was ordered to return Alsace-Lorraine to France. Most debilitating, Germany had to pay reparations, war damages, of $33 billion to the Allies, and admit total responsibility for the war. Certainly, Germany had played a major role in starting World War I, but other countries were equally involved. German citizens found the treaty outrageous, and there was no way the country could ever repay the Allies the money demanded. Instead of providing a lasting peace, the Treaty of Versailles began laying the groundwork for World War II.